The word on the street in Mexico has always been simple: silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. But for the people who chose a third option, talking to the Americans, posting online, passing a tip, recording a phone call, the consequences were never that clean or that quick. Narcos, the show, made cartel life look like a chess game played by men in expensive suits, calculated, almost elegant. The reality documented in federal court records, inspector general reports, academic research, and years of on-the-ground journalism is something entirely different. Informants in the cartel world do not simply get shot. They get made into messages. Their bodies become billboards. Their deaths become policy announcements directed at every living person who might be thinking about doing what they did. Today, we are covering what actually happens to cartel snitches, not the television version, the documented, verified, court record version. What you are about to hear is significantly worse than anything Narcos ever put on screen. Section 1. The Body Language of Death. How cartels mark their victims. A man is found on the side of a road in Juarez. His hands are bound. His index finger has been cut off. No note is needed. Every person in that city who sees the body or hears about it already knows exactly what that man did to deserve it. That is the point. Mexican cartels developed a communication system built entirely out of human bodies. They are not just killing people who talk to the police. They are sending a message to every single person who might ever think about talking to the police. The body is the message, the mutilation is the sentence, and the location where the body is dumped is the audience they are speaking to. Researchers who spent years studying cartel violence documented this in detail. Victims found with their index fingers severed were killed specifically because they were believed to have informed on cartel activity. In Spanish, the finger is called a dedo. To deder someone means to point them out to authorities. The cut finger is the cartel's way of explaining, publicly, why that person died. There is no ambiguity. There is no mystery. Everyone understands. The same system extends to how a body is treated after death. Eyes and mouth taped shut, a method called entipado, was specifically used for people who had passed information to authorities. Seeing it on a body told everyone in the area, this person talked. This is what happens when you talk. A body dissolved in acid, called pozoleado, leaves nothing to bury. A body stuffed into a sealed oil drum in concrete, called entambado, disappears entirely. A body wrapped tightly in a blanket, encobijado, placed on a busy street corner, forces the whole neighborhood to look at it before the police arrive. Each method has a specific meaning. Each one is chosen deliberately. In February 2009, a cartel left a dead police officer on a road with a handwritten note attached to the body. The note said, "This happens to gossips for dialing 066. That is the emergency number in Mexico, the equivalent of 911. The note was not addressed to the dead officer. It was addressed to every civilian who had ever thought about picking up the phone and calling that number to report what they had seen. This is the part that most television documentaries skip over. Shows like Narcos depict cartel violence as chaotic, impulsive men with guns losing their tempers. The reality documented by academic researchers and federal law enforcement is the opposite. The violence is deliberate. It is structured. It functions as a legal system inside a world where the actual legal system holds no power. When a cartel cuts off a finger, tapes shut a mouth, or dissolves a body in a barrel of acid, it is not acting out of rage. It is enforcing a rule. And that rule is simple. Anyone who talks to the outside world will be found. And when they are found, what is left of them will be used to teach everyone else the same lesson. The cartels even developed vocabulary for it. A narcomanta, literally a narco blanket, is a large banner hung publicly, sometimes at a crime scene, sometimes from a highway overpass, sometimes on the wall of a school, announcing who was killed and why. They list names, They include photos. Some include details of exactly what information the person allegedly gave to authorities, and exactly what operation that information helped disrupt. The banners are addressed to rival cartel members, to corrupt police on the wrong payroll, and to ordinary citizens who might be thinking about calling a tip line. The audience for all of this is not law enforcement. Law enforcement already knows. The audience is the millions of ordinary Mexican civilians who live alongside cartel territory and see things every single day that could, in theory, be reported. A safe house on their block, a truck moving at 3 in the morning, strangers with weapons at the corner they walk past to take their children to school, the body on the roadside, the finger cut off, the mouth taped shut, exists for those people. It is a constant, visible reminder of what the cost of speaking is. And it works. Journalists in Mexico have been forced into silence for years. Local newspapers stopped reporting on cartel activity, not because editors stopped caring, but because reporters kept dying. When traditional media went quiet, citizens turned to anonymous social media to warn each other about violence. The cartels responded by hunting down the people running those accounts and killing them too. A reality that will be covered in full when this video reaches Section 7. But the body symbolism documented here is the foundation of everything. Before a cartel kills a journalist, before they hang someone from a bridge for posting online, before they dig into phone records to identify a DEA source, they have already established, through years of public, deliberate, visible violence, that speaking has a price. That price is not a fine. It is not a prison sentence. It is what happens to a person when the people who built this system decide that person needs to become the next message. The index finger on the road, the mouth sealed shut, the body wrapped in a blanket at the corner of a busy street. Everyone already knows what it means. That is what the cartels do when they want to warn a community. But what happens when they identify a specific person, someone inside their own organization who they believe has been talking directly to U.S. federal agents? The next section covers one of the most documented cases of cartel internal punishment ever recorded. A house in a quiet neighborhood in Juarez, a code word for murder, and a U.S. government that knew what was happening inside that house and let it continue. Section 2. The House of Death. When the U.S. government knew and said nothing. At 3633 Calle Parsioneros in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, there was a house with a metal gate and a small backyard. From the outside, it looked like any other house in the neighborhood. Inside, between 2003 and 2004, members of the Juarez cartel brought people they suspected of being informants, tortured them, killed them, and buried their bodies in the dirt under the yard. At least 12 people were murdered there. The man who held the keys to that house worked for the United States government. His name was Guillermo Eduardo Ramirez Peiro. His nickname was Lalo. He was a former Mexican highway patrol officer who had been recruited by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, to infiltrate the Juarez cartel. ICE paid him. He also reported to the DEA. His job was to get close to cartel leadership, gather information, and pass it back to his American handlers. He did get close. Very close. Close enough that the cartel trusted him to run the house where they killed the people they believed were talking to law enforcement. The code word for a murder at the house was simple. Someone would call Lalo and say they were going to have a barbecue. That was the signal that a body needed to be processed. Lalo would unlock the gate. The killing would happen inside. The body would go into the ground. Lalo recorded some of what happened. NPR obtained documents showing he kept his ICE handlers informed about the murders accumulating at the house. He secretly recorded the first killing that took place there. In that recording, he admitted he was not just a witness. He was holding the victim's legs while the man was strangled, suffocated, and beaten with a shovel. One ICE agent who listened to that recording said it made him physically sick and he had to leave the room to vomit. He told his supervisor he did not want to be part of the case anymore. He stayed. So did Lalo. The supervisors told the agents to make sure Lalo did not participate in any more killings. The killings continued. By the time Mexican authorities discovered the bodies in January 2004, at least 12 people had been buried in that backyard. Court documents show Lalo admitted to being present during several of the murders. He admitted to driving 2 of the victims to the house. He insisted he never personally killed anyone. The recordings and court records told a more complicated story. What makes this case different from a standard story of cartel brutality is what was happening on the American side of the border while the bodies were going into the ground. ICE knew their informant was present at murders. They knew the house existed. They had recordings from inside it. The official policy of the U.S. Department of Justice was that undercover informants are not permitted to participate in acts of violence. That policy did not stop what was happening at 3633 Calle Parsioneros. A former agent involved in the case later said that if management had been fully informed, they could have implemented strategies that would have ultimately saved lives. The reason Lalo was kept active despite all of this was that he was producing results. He had worked his way into the confidence of Heriberto Santillán Tabares, the man U.S. agents believed was the number 3 figure in the entire Juarez cartel. That was the target. That was the case being built. The murders in the backyard were, in the language that gets used in these situations, an acceptable cost of doing business. The people buried under that house were cartel-connected individuals suspected of being informants themselves. Nobody in a position of authority made the call to shut it down. Santillán was eventually convicted of drug trafficking charges in the United States. As part of his plea deal, he was not charged with any of the murders that took place at the house. Lalo, the man who held the keys, recorded the first killing and admitted to being present at several others, ended up in a high-security American federal prison. He refused to be sent back to Mexico. His reasoning was direct. He said he was not trying to make any grand legal argument about what he deserved. He was simply saying, "Do not put him in the hands of the people who will kill him." Going back to Mexico, in his words, would be a death sentence. The house at 3633 Calle Parsioneros sits quiet now. The metal gate is still there. A veteran Juarez crime reporter who walked through the neighborhood with NPR journalists described the location without hesitation. He had covered the story when it broke. The neighborhood is ordinary. The house is ordinary. The backyard where 12 people were buried is small. There is nothing about it from the outside that would tell you what happened there. That is also, in a way, the point. The people buried in that yard were not given public deaths with narco banners and cut fingers and messages addressed to the community. They were disappeared, quietly, by a man on the American payroll in a house in a regular neighborhood while U.S. agents received reports and the policy handbook governing what informants were allowed to do sat unfinished on someone's desk in Washington. The murders only became known when Mexican authorities discovered the mass grave. By then it was 2004. The killings had been happening for months. The House of Death is a case where the U.S. government's own informant was present when suspected snitches were killed. But what happens when a cartel goes hunting for an informant on American soil, crosses the border, and executes him in his front yard in a quiet Texas suburb? That is exactly what Section 3 covers, and it produced what investigators believe is the first documented cartel assassination of a ranking member on U.S. territory. Section 3. The first cartel hit on American soil. José Daniel González Galeana, El Paso, 2009. José Daniel González Galeana had built a comfortable life in El Paso, Texas. He was 37 years old. He owned a 2-story Mediterranean-style house with a tile roof and a swimming pool that he had bought for $365,000. He had started a trucking company. He was raising a family. The house sat on a cul-de-sac in an expensive neighborhood called Rancho del Sol. His next-door neighbor, just a few doors down, was the El Paso chief of police. On the evening of May 15, 2009, Gonzalez walked out of his front door and was shot 8 times at close range.
The bullets were fired so tightly grouped that 3 of them traveled through his body and lodged in a neighbor's stucco wall and a parked car. A bloodstain remained on the pavement for weeks afterward. Neighbors who had watched children play on that same street were too frightened to speak publicly about what had happened. The police chief who lived nearby heard the shots from his backyard. Gonzalez was a lieutenant in the Juarez cartel. He also worked as a confidential informant for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. 3 separate U.S. officials confirmed this to the Associated Press, all speaking anonymously because they were not authorized to discuss informant cases. ICE's official response was that it is their policy to neither confirm nor deny the identity of confidential sources. Investigators believe his killing is the first documented case of a Mexican cartel sending assassins across the border to kill a ranking cartel member on American soil.
The chain of events that led to his death began in 2008. A cartel lieutenant named Pedro Arana Sanchez, known as El Tigre, was arrested. Shortly after, Mexican authorities raided a cartel storage facility. Gonzalez's fellow Juarez cartel members began connecting the dots. Then a Mexican newspaper published his name, identifying him as the informant responsible for El Tigre's arrest. From that moment, Gonzalez knew what was coming. Court documents filed after his death recorded that he had told a witness he was being hunted. He was concerned for his own safety and the safety of his family. ICE had given him a visa to live in El Paso, moving him out of Mexico and onto American soil. His cartel associates interpreted that move as further confirmation. A ranking cartel member does not simply leave Mexico and start living in Texas unless he has made a deal with somebody. The man sent to find him and organize his execution was Ruben Rodriguez Dorado, 30 years old, a Mexican citizen also living in El Paso. Rodriguez was himself a mid-level member of the Juarez cartel. His specialty, as he later described it to investigators, was coordinating surveillance of intended victims up until their execution in Mexico. He had been brought north of the border to do the same work on American soil. What investigators discovered afterward made the case significantly more disturbing. Rodriguez was also, at the time of the murder, a paid informant for ICE. The same agency that had given Gonzalez a visa to protect his life was simultaneously running the man organizing his assassination. Rodriguez tracked Gonzalez methodically. He paid Gonzalez's cell phone bill so he could monitor the number and learn his location. He recruited a team of local people who were not formal cartel members, but who were willing to work for money. That team included an 18-year-old U.S. Army soldier named Michael Jackson Apodaca, stationed at Fort Bliss near El Paso, and a 17-year-old named Christopher Duran. A 16-year-old boy was paid to conduct surveillance and reconnaissance on Gonzalez in the hours before the killing. On the night of May 15th, the team followed Gonzalez from a relative's house in Canutillo, Texas. They tracked him back to his home in Rancho del Sol. Apodaca walked up to Gonzalez in his front yard and fired 8 shots at close range. Duran drove the getaway car. Phone records placed all of them at the scene. During interrogation, Rodriguez told investigators he had ordered the execution and paid the participants for their roles. Apodaca told investigators he was the shooter and that he had been paid to do it. A warrant was issued for a 4th man, Jesus Aguayo Salas, 33 years old, described as a ranking cartel official in Mexico who had ordered and funded the hit. Rodriguez, Apodaca, Duran, and the 16-year-old were all charged with capital murder. Each of the 3 adult defendants was held on $1 million bond. The killing exposed serious failures in how American federal agencies were managing cartel informants. El Paso's police chief, Greg Allen, who had heard the shots from his own backyard, went public with his anger.
He said he had not been informed that a ranking cartel member was living in his city on an ICE-issued visa. He had not been told that another cartel member, also an ICE informant, had been placed in the same city and was a specialist in arranging assassinations. In a meeting of a multi-agency law enforcement group after the killing, Allen told federal authorities directly that his future cooperation depended on them sharing that kind of information with his department. He described the situation plainly. 2 ICE informants. 1 assigned to gather intelligence. 1 assigned, it turned out, to kill the first one. Both of them living in El Paso, paid by the same agency, operating in the same city, with local police kept completely in the dark. Experts who spoke to the press at the time said the killing represented something new. Cartel-connected hitmen had previously killed low-level drug dealers inside the United States. Targeting a ranking member on a residential street with a team that included an active-duty American soldier was a different level of operation entirely. It showed that the border was not the protection it was assumed to be. Gonzalez was killed because his cartel identified him through a combination of arrests, raids, and a newspaper that printed his name. But identifying informants has become far more sophisticated since 2009. In Section 4, the Sinaloa cartel did not rely on newspapers or internal suspicion. They hired a professional hacker, infiltrated Mexico City's government surveillance camera network, and used it to track an FBI official's movements and identify anyone who met with American law enforcement. Section 4. The Sinaloa cartel hacked Mexico City's surveillance cameras to hunt informants. In 2018, the FBI was in the middle of building one of the most significant drug trafficking cases in American history. The trial of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was coming. Witnesses were being prepared. Sources inside Mexico were passing information to American agents. The operation required confidentiality above everything else. At the same time, the Sinaloa cartel was running its own operation. Their goal was to find out exactly who was talking to the Americans. To do that, they hired a hacker. What that hacker was able to access and what the cartel did with the information was documented in a 2025 report by the U.S. Department of Justice Inspector General, the independent watchdog that audits federal law enforcement agencies. The report was titled, "An Audit of the FBI's Efforts to Mitigate the Effects of What It Called Ubiquitous Technical Surveillance." Parts of it were redacted. What remained was detailed enough to be alarming. According to the report, the hacker gained access to Mexico City's government-operated surveillance camera network. Mexico City has thousands of cameras positioned across the city, including on streets near government buildings, embassies, and federal offices. The hacker used that access to track the physical movements of the FBI's assistant legal attaché in Mexico, a senior FBI official whose job involves working directly with Mexican law enforcement on cross-border cases. The hacker followed this official through the city's camera system, watching where they went, who they met, and what routes they traveled. That was not all. The hack combined with the camera access, this gave the cartel a detailed, real-time picture of the FBI's operations in Mexico City. The specific focus of the surveillance was the area around the U.S. Embassy on Paseo de la Reforma. The hacker monitored who entered and exited the embassy. Anyone who was seen meeting with the FBI attaché or who entered the embassy in a pattern that suggested they were passing information became a potential target. The cartel was not guessing anymore. They were watching. An FBI case agent involved at the time was direct about what happened next. According to the Inspector General's report, the cartel used the information provided by the hacker to intimidate and, in some instances, kill potential sources or cooperating witnesses. The report did not specify exactly how many people were killed as a result of this operation, and parts of the relevant sections were redacted in the publicly available version. But the language was unambiguous. People who met with American law enforcement in Mexico City during this period were identified.
Some of them died for it. A former acting DEA administrator explained the broader reality this operation reflects. The cartels, he said, run a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise and use sophisticated technology to enhance their business operations. They utilize surveillance techniques specifically designed to identify law enforcement activities and find their adversaries. What the Sinaloa cartel did in 2018 was not an improvised effort. It was a deliberate, funded, professionally executed counterintelligence operation targeting American federal agents on foreign soil. The FBI and CIA both described the threat posed by this kind of surveillance as existential to national security operations. That word, existential, appears in the Inspector General's report itself, attributed to officials within those agencies. The concern is not just about one cartel in one city in 1 year. The concern is that commercial technology has advanced to the point where criminal organizations with significant money can purchase or access the same surveillance capabilities that were once exclusive to nation-state intelligence agencies. Facial recognition, phone data exploitation, camera network infiltration. These tools are available, and the cartels have the resources to buy access to them. What makes this particular operation significant in the context of informant hunting is the methodology. Previous cases covered in this video involved cartels identifying snitches through internal suspicion, leaked newspaper articles, or corrupt police officers passing along names. Those methods were effective, but limited. A newspaper can only publish a name if someone already suspects a person. A corrupt officer can only sell information they already have. The hacker operation in 2018 required no prior suspicion of any specific individual. The cartel was not looking for a particular person. They were surveilling the process itself, watching the door that informants walk through to reach the Americans, and identifying anyone who used it. That is a fundamentally different level of threat. It means that a person who has never been suspected, who has taken reasonable precautions, who has told no one about their contact with U.S. law enforcement, can still be identified simply by being seen on a camera near the wrong building at the wrong time. The cartel does not need to know your name before they start watching you. They just need to see you walk into the embassy. The FBI's response, according to the Inspector General's report, included work on a strategic plan to address the vulnerabilities identified. The report noted that long-standing risks posed by widespread technical surveillance had been known for years before the 2018 operation. The plan was ongoing at the time the report was published. The hacker who carried out the surveillance was never publicly identified in the portions of the report available. Their identity remains redacted. What is known is what the operation accomplished. The cartel found people who were talking to the Americans. Those people were then, in the language of the report, intimidated or killed. The hacker operation shows how far cartels will go using technology and money to identify informants from the outside. But some of the most devastating betrayals do not come from hackers or surveillance cameras. They come from inside law enforcement itself. Section 5 covers the case of a DEA informant who was identified, kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Not because the cartel found him on their own, but because Mexico's top law enforcement official allegedly handed his photograph directly to the men who wanted him dead. Section 5. The Colombian DEA. Informant, sold out by Mexico's own top cop. For years, the Beltran-Leyva organization ran one of the most profitable cocaine supply chains in the world. Colombian suppliers would load cocaine onto boats and travel to international waters near Mexico. There, they would meet the cartel's powerboats and submarines. The drugs would transfer at sea, get brought to shore, and move north toward the United States. The operation was large, consistent, and enormously profitable. Then, it started falling apart.
Between 2007 and 2008, over a period of 6 to 7 months, shipment after shipment was intercepted by U.S. officials. The cocaine was seized by the DEA before it could reach its destination. The Beltran-Leyva brothers lost supply after supply with no explanation.
In the cartel world, when operations fail repeatedly in a short period of time, there is only one conclusion that gets drawn. Someone is talking. Arturo Beltran-Leyva, who led the organization, ordered his people to find the source of the leak. He also reached out to corrupt contacts inside Mexican federal law enforcement for help. What happened next was documented through sworn testimony delivered in federal court in the United States, first during the trial of El Chapo, and later during the trial of Genaro Garcia Luna. Mexican federal police officials showed up to a meeting with the cartel carrying a cardboard binder. Inside that binder was a photograph of a man and his personal details. The man in the photograph was a Colombian national. He had been arrested in Miami and had begun cooperating with the DEA, passing intelligence that allowed American agents to intercept the Beltran-Leyva cocaine shipments coming from Colombia. He was, at the time his photograph was placed on that table in front of Arturo Beltran-Leyva, a working DEA asset. His identity was supposed to be protected. Arturo Beltran-Leyva looked at the photograph. He gave the order immediately. His lieutenants Mario Pineda Villa, known as LMP, and others were instructed to find the man, take him, and get a confession out of him. Two high-ranking members of the organization kidnapped the Colombian informant from a location in central Mexico. They tortured him. During that torture, he admitted he had been arrested in Miami and had started cooperating with the DEA from that point forward, providing information that directly targeted the Beltran-Leyva supply chain. After he confessed, he was killed. The person who allegedly handed over the photograph and the identity was Genaro Garcia Luna. Garcia Luna was not a low-level corrupt official. He was Mexico's Secretary of Public Security under President Felipe Calderón, the most powerful law enforcement position in the country. He oversaw the federal police, the prison system, and a vast intelligence network. Washington considered him a trusted partner. The DEA worked with him directly. He was described publicly as an architect of Mexico's drug war, the man the United States government was relying on to dismantle the cartels. According to testimony delivered under oath in a Brooklyn federal courtroom, Garcia Luna was simultaneously on the cartel's payroll. A former Beltran-Leyva operative named Sergio Villarreal Barragan, known as El Grande, testified that the Sinaloa cartel paid Garcia Luna up to $6 million, while the Beltran-Leyva organization paid him $50 million. In exchange, Garcia Luna provided the cartels with access to sensitive law enforcement information, including, according to testimony, the identity of the Colombian DEA informant. The officer who physically passed the informant's details to the cartel was identified in court proceedings as Ivan Reyes Arzate, the former commander of Mexico's Sensitive Investigative Unit, known as the SIU. The SIU was an elite anti-drug unit built specifically with American support and funding, designed to be a corruption-free team that could work directly with U.S. agencies. Reyes Arzate, along with two other federal police officers, received $3 million for the information they handed over. A DEA agent who testified about discovering Reyes Arzate's betrayal described the moment he found out as getting punched in the stomach. He said it was very difficult to process that one of the most wanted and violent criminals in drug trafficking history had an ongoing relationship with the commander of the unit specifically designed to fight people like him. Reyes Arzate was eventually caught, prosecuted, and convicted in the United States for his role in passing information to cartels. Garcia Luna's trial began in a Brooklyn federal courthouse in January 2023. He was convicted. The jury found him guilty on all 5 counts, including engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise. During the trial, testimony established that he had given cartels access to sensitive law enforcement information about ongoing operations. The murder of the Colombian DEA informant, while not a standalone charge against Garcia Luna, was part of the factual foundation laid by prosecutors to show how that access was used. What this case illustrates is a specific and documented reality about informant protection in Mexico during this period. A person could be arrested in Miami, agree to cooperate with American federal agents, be handled by DEA officers, and still end up kidnapped and tortured in central Mexico because the information about their cooperation traveled from American law enforcement to a Mexican security official to a cartel boss in the time it took to prepare a cardboard binder with a photograph inside it. The DEA informant in this case had no way of knowing that the system he was cooperating with had been compromised at the very top. He was following instructions. He was providing accurate intelligence that was producing real results visible in the number of shipments being seized. Those results were exactly what got him identified. The more useful he was to the Americans, the more urgently the cartel needed to find him. He was found. The Colombian informant was sold out by a government official who was paid to protect him. But not every informant is betrayed by law enforcement. Some are exposed by the cartels themselves, who photograph the bodies of people they have killed for talking, and send those photographs as direct warnings to anyone thinking about doing the same thing. Section 6 covers exactly that, and it was all documented in federal court records filed in New York. Section 6. Sinaloa members photographed dead snitches and sent the photos as warnings. Most of what cartels do to informants happens in the dark. Bodies disappear. People vanish. Families are told nothing. The cartel's internal enforcement system is deliberately designed to be invisible to the outside world, while remaining completely visible to everyone inside it. But sometimes the cartel wants the outside world to see exactly what they did. And when that happens, they document it themselves. In a federal prosecution brought by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, investigators intercepted a series of messages sent between members of the Sinaloa cartel operating in the United States and Mexico between 2015 and 2016. Those messages were entered into court records. What they contained was not coded language or vague references to criminal activity. They were direct, explicit, and accompanied by photographs. The two men at the center of the case were Cornelio Cazares Madrid and Sinoje Antonio Araujo Meza, both 42 years old. Over the course of roughly 1 year, their trafficking operation moved more than 2,000 kilograms of cocaine, 130 kilograms of heroin, and 300 pounds of methamphetamine into the United States. Their distribution network reached across California, Chicago, the Bronx, and Costa Rica. DEA seizures connected to their operation totaled around 675 kilograms of cocaine, 70 kilograms of heroin, and 26 kilograms of methamphetamine, along with $3.4 million in cash and 7 firearms. Both men pleaded guilty in 2019. The intercepted messages told a story that went beyond drug trafficking. Federal investigators found messages in which Madrid sent photographs of 2 people. In those photographs, the 2 individuals were partially clothed and lying on the ground with their hands bound behind their backs. Subsequent photographs in the same message showed the same 2 people, shot dead, lying in a pool of blood. Taped to the back of one of the victims was a handwritten sign. Written in Spanish, the sign said, "This is what happens to scum and snitches." The photographs were not sent privately between 2 people trying to keep something quiet. They were sent as communication within the cartel network, the kind of message that gets forwarded, shown around, and understood by everyone who receives it as a statement of organizational policy. This is what we do. This is what we document. This is what you will see if you make the same choice those 2 people made. Madrid sent another message in August 2016. That message included a photograph of what appeared to be a dead Mexican police officer. The accompanying text explained that the photograph was proof he keeps his word. The context provided in court documents was that the officer was connected to someone who had, in Madrid's words, wronged him too many times. The photograph of the dead officer was not sent out of anger or impulsiveness. It was sent as a credential. It was evidence of follow-through, offered to other cartel members as confirmation that Madrid was someone who did what he said he would do. A separate message sent by Mesa described a killing that had taken place in the Mexican state of Chiapas. Mesa referred to that murder as his Christmas present. The images themselves were redacted in the publicly available court filings and sealed to protect the identities of the victims. But the descriptions of those images, the context surrounding them, and the words accompanying them were part of the official record filed in federal court in New York. The U.S. Attorney's Office quoted from them directly in their press release announcing the sentences. Madrid was sentenced to 38 years in federal prison. Mesa received 30 years. Federal prosecutors described both men as prolific drug traffickers who relied on brutal violence to protect their organization. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York stated publicly that the operation was not only dangerous in its importation of thousands of kilograms of poison into the United States, but also in its use of firearms and violence, including murder, to protect the operation. What this case documents is something specific about how cartel anti-informant enforcement actually functions at the operational level. Madrid and Mesa were not the top of the Sinaloa organization. They were mid-level operators running a distribution network, and at that level, the photographing of executed snitches and the sending of those photographs as messages was standard enough that it showed up in their regular communication traffic. Federal investigators intercepted these messages during what was, from the cartel's perspective, routine business correspondence. That detail matters. It means the practice of documenting and broadcasting informant killings is not reserved for extreme cases or high-level internal conflicts. It is embedded in the daily operation of the organization at every level. A mid-level distributor in Chicago sends a photograph of two bound people about to be shot as a normal part of his communication with the network. The sign taped to the victim's back is prepared in advance. The follow-up photographs confirming the deaths are taken and sent. All of this is routine. For anyone inside that network who receives those messages, the meaning is impossible to misread. These are not threats. A threat describes something that might happen. What Madrid sent was a record of something that already happened, with a label attached explaining why. The people in those photographs made a specific choice. The sign on the body names that choice. The photographs of the bodies after they were shot confirm what followed from that choice. The entire sequence, start to finish, is designed to leave no room for ambiguity in the mind of anyone who sees it. The cartel is not asking its members to imagine what will happen if they talk. It is showing them. __quote _2__. Madrid and Mesa used private messages to spread their warnings inside a criminal network. But in Section 7, Los Zetas decided that private warnings were not enough. They went completely public, hanging bodies from bridges and decapitating a journalist in the middle of a city, all because ordinary people were using social media to warn each other about cartel violence. Section 7. Internet Snitches. Los Zetas killed people for posting about them online. By 2011, traditional media in Nuevo Laredo had gone almost completely silent on cartel violence. Newspapers that once covered drug war killings had stopped. Reporters who tried to continue had been threatened, beaten, or killed. Editors had made quiet decisions to pull back, to self-censor, to stay alive. The cartels had systematically dismantled the press in that city and in much of the surrounding region of Tamaulipas, which was firmly under Los Zetas' control. So ordinary people built something else, a website called Nuevo Laredo en Vivo, Nuevo Laredo Live became the place where citizens posted anonymous warnings about what was happening on their streets. When there was a shootout on a particular road, someone would post it. When a neighborhood was being blocked by armed men, someone would warn about it. When bodies were found, the location would go up before police had finished taping off the scene. The site was not run by journalists. It was run by regular people using pseudonyms, sharing information with their neighbors because the newspapers had stopped doing it. Los Zetas were watching. On September 13, 2011, 2 people were found hanging from a bridge in Nuevo Laredo. They were a man and a woman, both in their 20s. They had been disemboweled. A large narco banner had been hung alongside their bodies. The message on that banner was addressed directly to the website and to social media users who had been posting about cartel activity. The Zetas were explicit about why those 2 people had been chosen and what they had done to deserve what happened to them. 12 days later, on September 25, 2011, Marisol Macias Castañeda was murdered. Macias was 39 years old and worked as the editor-in-chief of a local newspaper called Primera Hora in Nuevo Laredo. Alongside her day job, she had been secretly posting on Nuevo Laredo en Vivo under the pseudonym Nena de Laredo. Her posts reported on cartel activity in the city. She targeted Los Zetas specifically, describing their operations and their violence for a local audience that had no other source of that information. Nobody at her newspaper knew what she was doing online. She had kept it completely separate. Los Zetas found out who she was. She was decapitated. Her head was placed on top of the Christopher Columbus Monument, a well-known stone structure in a busy, heavily traveled section of the city. The rest of her body was left on the grass nearby, along with a keyboard, cables, and computer disks. The objects placed with her body were not random. They were chosen to make the message clear. This woman used a computer and the internet to report on us. Here is what that cost her. The Zetas left a handwritten note beside her remains. The note was written in first person, as if Macias herself was speaking. It said, "OK Nuevo Laredo en Vivo," and social media sites. "I am Nena de Laredo, and I am here because of my online reports and yours. For those who do not believe this happened to me because of my actions, for trusting in the Army and Marines." The note ended with, "Thank you for your attention, La Nena de Laredo." The note served 2 purposes simultaneously. It identified her online pseudonym publicly, connecting her real identity to her anonymous posts in a way that would be read by everyone who had followed Nena de Laredo on the site. And it told every other anonymous poster on every other social media platform exactly what the Zetas knew and exactly what they were willing to do with that knowledge. Anonymity had not protected her. A pseudonym had not protected her. The fact that she was a civilian with no formal connection to law enforcement had not protected her. She had reported on them. That was enough. 2 months later, on November 9, 2011, a moderator of the same website was killed. This person had used the pseudonym Rascatripus, which translates roughly as belly scratcher. They were killed by beheading, and their body was left at the same location where Macias had been murdered. The Zetas were returning to the same spot deliberately. They were turning that location into a symbol. The killings had a documented effect on the website and on similar platforms. The flow of anonymous tips and public warnings about cartel activity slowed. People who had been posting stopped posting. Some sites went dark entirely. The Zetas had correctly identified citizen journalism as a threat to their control of the information environment in Nuevo Laredo, and had responded to that threat the same way they responded to every other kind of opposition. What makes this sequence of killings different from the other cases in this video is who the targets were. José Daniel González Galeana was a cartel lieutenant passing intelligence to ICE. The Colombian informant in Section 5 was a DEA asset providing intelligence that disrupted specific operations. The people killed by Los Zetas for their online activity were, in most cases, civilians with no connection to law enforcement at all. Marisol Macias was a newspaper editor. The two people hung from the bridge in September were in their 20s. Rascatripas was a website moderator. Their crime, in the Zetas' framing, was information. They knew things. They shared those things with their community. In a city where the cartels had decided they controlled what could and could not be said publicly, that act of sharing made them snitches. The definition of informant inside cartel territory is not limited to someone who calls the police or meets with a federal agent. It extends to anyone who makes public what the cartel wants kept private. The keyboard placed beside Marisol Macias on the grass near the Christopher Columbus Monument was not a coincidence. It was a prop in a message, and the message was, "We know what tools you are using. We know who you are behind your screen name, and the tool will be found next to your body when we are done with you." The Zetas killed people for posting online because they had decided that information itself was a threat worth murdering over. But not everyone who becomes a cartel informant is a civilian trying to warn their neighbors. Section 8 covers the Flores twins, two men who were El Chapo's most trusted distributors in the United States, who secretly recorded their own boss and then spent years living in total isolation while the cartel they betrayed looked for ways to reach them. Section 8. The Flores twins. What surviving as an informant actually looks like. Pedro and Margarito Flores grew up in Little Village, a neighborhood on the southwest side of Chicago. Their older brother Armando was already deep in gang life by the time they were teenagers, connected to the Latin Kings. The twins were introduced to that world at around 12 years old. By their early 20s, they had moved far beyond street-level dealing. They had built direct relationships with the leadership of the Sinaloa cartel. Not mid-level distributors, not regional suppliers, but the top of the organization itself. El Chapo, El Mayo Zambada, Arturo Beltran Leyva. Their operation worked like a distribution company. They received bulk shipments of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine from the cartel and moved it through a network that reached Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Los Angeles, and Vancouver. They described their business model in later interviews as similar to a McDonald's franchise: standardized, consistent, scalable. The profit margins were tracked like stock prices, with sale prices higher the further north a shipment traveled. Over the course of their operation, they moved more than 60 tons of cocaine and heroin into the United States. They also smuggled close to $2 billion in cash back to Mexico. El Chapo was their most difficult business partner. In early 2005, an associate connected to El Chapo kidnapped Pedro Flores and held him for over 2 weeks, bringing him close to starvation. Margarito traveled to the mountains of Mexico and negotiated directly with El Chapo for his brother's release, ultimately paying off a debt that had been caused by one of El Chapo's own men. El Mayo Zambada, by contrast, treated Margarito like a son. Arturo Beltran Leyva, though less publicly known than El Chapo, moved more product than either of the other two bosses. El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, who they also dealt with, was described by Margarito in a later interview as violent from the beginning, always trying to prove himself. By 2008, the twins were caught between two rival cartels who both wanted their exclusive loyalty and were prepared to kill them if they worked for the other side. The Sinaloa cartel and the Beltran Leyva organization had split and gone to war. The twins were major assets, and both sides wanted them locked in. The pressure was becoming dangerous in a way that normal cartel business pressure was not. They made a decision. On November 30th, 2008, Pedro and Margarito Flores surrendered themselves to U.S. federal authorities. They went from living as millionaire narcos to sitting in federal custody within a single day. Before they surrendered, for a period of 9 months, they had been secretly recording their conversations with cartel leadership while continuing to operate. They had gone to a Radio Shack and bought recording equipment themselves because the DEA had not yet provided them with any. One of those recordings captured a phone call in which El Chapo greeted Pedro Flores as amigo before negotiating a heroin deal. That recording was played in open court during El Chapo's 2018 trial in Brooklyn, with El Chapo sitting at the defense table and Pedro Flores on the witness stand. The two men had not been in the same room since it became known the twins were cooperating. According to reporting from the courtroom, El Chapo stared directly at Flores throughout the testimony, with a completely flat expression. The cooperation the twins provided was extraordinary in scope. Their recordings and testimony led to indictments against El Chapo, El Mayo Zambada, Arturo Beltran Leyva and his brothers and sons, and more than 50 other traffickers. The federal judge who sentenced them in 2015 said he would have given them life sentences without question, given the volume of drugs they had moved. Because of what they provided, he sentenced them to 14 years each. He also told them directly, at sentencing, what the rest of their lives would look like. Anytime you start your car, the judge said, you are going to be wondering if it is going to explode. The years between their surrender in 2008 and their sentencing in 2015 were spent largely in segregated custody, isolated from general prison population for their own safety. Many of those years were spent in conditions close to solitary confinement, alone for most of each day, separated from other inmates, moved carefully and quietly through the federal system. Their lawyer's name was never released to the public. Their location within the federal prison system was not disclosed. When they were released in 2020, they entered witness protection. Their wives, Mia and Olivia Flores, had, during those years, written a book called Cartel Wives and branded themselves publicly around their connection to the twins and to El Chapo. That public profile led directly to federal charges. Both women pleaded guilty to money laundering conspiracy, having hidden and spent millions of dollars of the twins' drug proceeds while claiming they had turned everything over to the government. Mia Flores was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Their brother Armando, who had buried approximately $1.9 million in drug proceeds in the backyard of his house in Round Rock, Texas, also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to time served. Margarito Flores, now free and in his 40s, has spoken publicly about his life after cooperation. He gives training sessions to law enforcement about cartel operations through a group called Dynamic Police Training. He testified before a congressional task force on Mexican drug cartels. He describes watching his back constantly. He says the thing that keeps him going is a need to do something useful with what he knows. He also said something that cuts through everything else. At least, he said, they are alive and able to be fathers and husbands. For the people buried in the backyard of the House of Death, for Jose Daniel Gonzalez Galeana shot 8 times in his front yard, for the Colombian DEA informant tortured in central Mexico, that outcome, alive, a father, a husband, was not available. The Flores twins survived because the U.S. government had enough resources and motivation to keep them protected across years of custody and legal proceedings. But survival comes at a cost that most people never see. Section 9 covers what happens on the inside of law enforcement when informant programs go wrong. Specifically, how the people running informants sometimes become just as dangerous to those informants as the cartels themselves. Section 9. Corrupt police handed informant identities to cartels for $3 million. The sensitive investigative unit inside Mexico's federal police was not supposed to be like the rest of Mexican law enforcement. It was built specifically to be different. The United States government provided funding, training, and direct operational support to create an elite anti-drug unit that could work alongside American agencies, the DEA, the FBI, the CIA, without the corruption that had hollowed out every other law enforcement institution in Mexico. Officers in the unit were vetted. They were given access to classified intelligence. They worked on the most sensitive cases the two countries were running together. Ivan Reyes Arzate commanded that unit. He was known inside the cartel world by the nickname La Reina, the Queen. While he was running the unit specifically designed to be a bridge between American and Mexican law enforcement, he was simultaneously passing classified intelligence to the Sinaloa cartel and to the Beltran Leyva organization. He was not doing it occasionally or reluctantly. He was doing it systematically, for money, over an extended period of time. The case that exposed him most clearly was the murder of the Colombian DEA informant described in Section 5. According to testimony delivered by a DEA special agent in U.S. federal court, Reyes Arzate was the conduit through which the informant's identity traveled from inside the law enforcement system to the hands of Arturo Beltran Leyva. The agent testified that Reyes Arzate explained to the cartel that the informant had been arrested in Miami and had begun cooperating with the DEA immediately, providing information that allowed American agents to intercept the Beltran Leyva cocaine shipments coming from Colombia. That explanation, delivered by the commander of Mexico's elite anti-drug unit to the cartel boss whose supply chain the informant had disrupted, was a death warrant. Reyes Arzate and two other federal police officers received $3 million for it. The DEA agent who testified about uncovering Reyes Arzate's betrayal described the moment he confronted him. "It was like getting punched in the stomach," the agent said. "It was very difficult to hear that one of the most wanted and violent criminals in drug trafficking history had an ongoing relationship with the commander of the unit specifically designed to fight people like him." What happened next was documented in court. A close DEA friend of Reyes Arzate confronted him in a hotel room in Mexico City. Reyes Arzate broke down and admitted everything. His cartel alliances, his years of passing information, the relationships he had built with the organizations he was supposed to be dismantling. He then flew with his DEA contact to Chicago, where he turned himself in to American authorities. He was prosecuted in the United States, not Mexico. He was convicted. But Reyes Arzate was not the only corrupt official documented passing informant identities to cartels during this period. The Garcia Luna trial, which produced testimony about Reyes Arzate's role, also established a much broader pattern. Genaro Garcia Luna, as described in Section 5, sat at the top of Mexico's entire security apparatus. The testimony against him described a system in which cartel money moved upward through the federal police structure, buying protection and information at every level. Court testimony from multiple witnesses established specific figures. The Sinaloa cartel paid Garcia Luna up to $6 million. The Beltran Leyva organization paid him $50 million. In return, the cartels received what those payments were designed to buy: advance warning of operations targeting them, the identities of people cooperating with American law enforcement, and interference in cases that might otherwise have resulted in significant arrests. One piece of testimony described a meeting Garcia Luna held with his senior staff after one of his subordinates was arrested on cartel-related charges. Garcia Luna gathered his top officials around a conference table. The arrested man's nameplate was still in front of his empty chair. A pen and a notepad had been placed in front of that empty seat. Garcia Luna gave the group a speech. "The seat is empty for a reason," he told them. "If you do not want your seat to be empty, learn." A DEA regional director who was serving in Mexico City at the time heard about the meeting from his sources and later described it publicly. What this architecture of corruption meant for informants was precise and brutal. A person who agreed to cooperate with American law enforcement, who was handled by DEA agents, who provided verified intelligence that produced real operational results, could still be identified and killed because the information about their cooperation was accessible to officials who were selling it. The more successful an informant was, the more shipments they disrupted, the more arrests their intelligence produced, the more urgently the cartel wanted them found. And in an environment where the commander of the elite anti-drug unit was on the cartel payroll, finding them was not difficult. The informant protection systems that American agencies believed were in place in Mexico during this period were, in many cases, already compromised before they were even used. The vetting processes that were supposed to keep corrupt officials out of sensitive units had failed. The people those units were supposed to protect were dying because of it. There is a specific and documented detail from the Reyes Arzate case that captures this reality plainly. After the Colombian informant's identity was sold and the man was kidnapped and tortured, Reyes Arzate continued working as the commander of the sensitive investigative unit. He continued receiving American funding and training. He continued attending joint operational meetings with DEA agents who had no idea what he had done. He continued, right up until the moment the Americans caught up with him, by which point other informants he had access to had already been exposed. The unit built to protect the informants was being run by the man selling them. The corruption documented in Section 9 shows how informant identities moved from law enforcement files to cartel hit lists. But the final section covers what happens after the killing is done. The specific, deliberate, and documented practice of using the bodies of executed informants as a permanent public warning system, and why the cartels consider that final step just as important as the killing itself. Section 10. The Segunda Muerte. How cartels use the dead to control the living. When a cartel kills an informant, the killing itself is only part of the process. What happens to the body afterward is just as deliberate, just as planned, and, in many cases, just as important to the organization as the execution that preceded it. The body is not a problem to be disposed of. It is a tool to be deployed. This is the part that almost never makes it into television documentaries or mainstream news coverage. Shows like Narcos end the scene when the gun goes off. The actual cartel playbook continues long after that moment, and what follows is documented in academic research, federal court records, and years of reporting by journalists who covered the Mexican drug war from inside the country. The foundation of the system is public placement. A body left in a private location, hidden from view, teaches nobody anything. A body left on a busy road, at the entrance to a school, on the steps of a government building, or hanging from a highway overpass at the start of the morning commute, forces an entire community to reckon with it before the day has even started. The location is chosen to maximize the number of people who will see it before authorities arrive and remove it. In cities where cartel activity is heaviest, that window of visibility can last hours. The physical state of the body communicates the specific reason for the killing. As documented by researchers Bunker, Campbell, and Bunker in their peer-reviewed work on cartel violence, specific mutilations carry specific meanings that are universally understood within communities under cartel control. A severed index finger means the person pointed. They identified someone or something to the authorities. Taped eyes and mouth mean the person saw and said what they should have kept to themselves. These are not random acts of post-mortem violence. They are punctuation in a sentence the cartel is writing for a specific audience. Narco banners, called narcomantas, are often placed alongside or on top of the body. These are large, printed or handwritten signs that explain who the person was, what they did, and sometimes include specific operational details, which agency they cooperated with, which arrest their information led to, which cartel member they betrayed. The level of detail in some of these banners has included the informant's real name alongside their pseudonym, their home address, and the names of family members. Publishing that information publicly serves a second purpose beyond explaining the current killing. It warns everyone named in the banner that they are known, they are being watched, and they are next if they do not stop whatever they are doing. The practice documented as Segunda Muerte, second death, takes this logic further than the body of the original victim. In cases of extreme internal punishment, particularly targeting individuals judged to have cooperated with law enforcement. Cartels have exhumed the bodies of the informants' deceased relatives, parents, grandparents, people already buried, already mourned, already at rest. The remains are disturbed, desecrated, and in some documented cases, displayed publicly alongside messaging that connects the desecration to the informant's original act of cooperation. The message is not addressed to the dead. The dead cannot receive it. It is addressed to every living family member who will have to bury their relatives a second time, and to every person in the community who watches that happen. This practice has been documented specifically in connection with the Sinaloa cartel and has historical parallels with methods used by the Sicilian mafia. It represents the cartel's answer to a specific problem. What do you do when the person you want to punish is already dead? The answer in this system is that you extend the punishment to everyone connected to that person, including the people they loved who are no longer alive to be threatened directly. The practical effect on communities living inside cartel territory is well documented.
Reporting from across Tamaulipas, Guerrero, Sinaloa, and Guanajuato describes a population that has learned to see without seeing, to know without saying they know, to observe cartel activity in daily life and store it in a part of their mind that never connects to a phone or a conversation with anyone outside their immediate household. An 82-year-old farmer interviewed by NPR journalists near a cartel training facility in Jalisco described watching armed cartel convoys move past his fields. His response was to crouch down and say nothing. At night, he said, he could hear gunfire. He had been doing this for years. NPR did not publish his name because he feared retaliation. That farmer is the target audience for everything described in this video. Not law enforcement, not rival cartels, not politicians. Ordinary people who go about their lives in communities where the cartel operates and who, every single day, accumulate knowledge that could theoretically be passed to someone with the power to act on it. The entire enforcement apparatus, the severed fingers, the taped mouths, the narcomantas, the bodies on the bridge, the desecrated graves, exists to ensure that knowledge stays exactly where it is, inside the head of the person who witnessed it, going nowhere. The Sinaloa cartel members documented in Section 6 sent photographs of bound victims with signs reading, "This is what happens to snitches," to their distribution network as routine business communication. Los Zetas placed a keyboard next to a decapitated journalist to make sure the connection between her tool and her death was impossible to miss. The Juarez cartel buried 12 bodies under a house in a quiet neighborhood while a U.S. government informant held the keys. A Colombian DEA asset was sold to his killers for $3 million by the commander of a unit built with American money to protect people exactly like him. None of these cases are isolated. They are all expressions of the same system, operating at different levels, in different locations, across different years. A system built on a single organizing principle, that the cost of speaking must always be visible, always be credible, and always be worse than whatever the person might have gained by opening their mouth. The bodies on the road are not the end of the story. They are the story, retold every time someone drives past and decides to keep looking straight ahead. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.